Fantasy Zone 2: The Tears of Opa Opa was released for the Master System in 1987 and is a sequel to Sega's arcade hit Fantasy Zone from the year prior. At first glance, this appears to be a shmup, but the gameplay has more in common with Defender than a true side-scrolling shoot-'em-up. The goal in Fantasy Zone 2 is simple: clear all of the enemy bases on the screen, then warp to the next screen and repeat. Once you have cleared all the enemy bases from each screen in the level, you can then warp to the boss. Destroying the boss will take you to the next level. The screens themselves scroll endlessly, so if you fly right for a few seconds, you'll end up in the same location. The game feels overwhelming at first, but each screen isn't as big as it first appears. Warping from screen to screen is simple at first, but as the levels progress, there are more and more screens, which makes finding the screen with the boss warp a bit trickier. The controls in Fantasy Zone 2 are excellent. Your ship is twitchy and responsive with the perfect amount of momentum. You have two weapons, a forward shot and a bomb that angles downward. Upgrading your weapons requires visiting a shop. In each shop are various weapon and speed upgrades. Some upgrades are permanent, like speed upgrades and more powerful shot and bombs. Others are temporary, lasting a specific amount of time before expiring. Better yet, sometimes the shops contain extra lives, which is obviously handy. Unfortunately, if you die, you will lose all of your permanent upgrades and start back at square one. Thankfully, if you die on a boss, you are put back into the level, so you can seek out a shop and get your upgrades back if you have enough money. As you've no doubt noticed by now, Fantasy Zone 2 is a terrific looking game. The use of color is excellent, and each stage features a bold color palette that pops off the screen. The background details are usually well done, ranging from rich flora to geometric shapes. Fantasy Zone 2 also throws a ton of enemies on the screen at once, and the Master System does a fairly good job of keeping up with the chaos. Speaking of chaos, Fantasy Zone 2 is an incredibly challenging game. The screen quickly fills with a ton of different enemy chains at once, and some of those do a good job of squeezing you into difficult situations, which can be tough to manage. You'll need to learn enemy patterns to determine when it's best to fight, or when it's best to just zoom across the screen and avoid the whole mess altogether. It's this fight or flight mechanic that really drew me into the game. Fantasy Zone 2 requires a lot of gameplay management. You need to make sure you are destroying all of the enemy bases on each screen before moving on to the next. It's always disappointing to think you are going to get warped to the boss, only to realize there is still a base somewhere that you need to hunt down. On top of that is the item management. Some enemies drop coins, enemy chains drop large coins, and enemy bases drop paper money. All of this money can be used in the shops for upgrades and other goodies. You'll need to keep a good balance of money so you can upgrade your weapon for boss battles. Additionally, you'll need a good amount of cash on hand to replenish everything when you die. The monetization system does a great job of making Fantasy Zone 2 stand out amongst other arcade-style shooters of the era. Rounding out Fantasy Zone 2 is the sound. I've never been a big fan of the sound hardware in the Master System, and this game doesn't do much to sway my opinion. Some of the melodies are catchy for sure, but as a whole, everything is high-pitched, and there just isn't much depth here. Still, it's better than most Master System games, but certainly can't hold a candle to the best 8-bit offerings. Overall, Fantasy Zone 2 is a fantastic little game. It does a great job of representing what Sega was in the 80s, with challenging gameplay and beautiful graphics. I may be terrible at this game and desperately wish there were unlimited continues, but I can certainly appreciate it. 4 out of 5.